In 2014, a group smaller than many city police forces seized territory the size of Great Britain. They built a state with ministries, courts, oil revenue, and a population of 8 million people. Then in less than 5 years it was gone, destroyed by a global coalition that included more than 80 countries. This is the complete timeline of how the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria rose, ruled, and fell, and why understanding every step matters today. Their story begins not in 2014, but in 2003, when the United States launched its invasion of Iraq. According to the Wilson Center's comprehensive timeline on the rise and fall of the Islamic State, the power vacuum created by that invasion set off a chain reaction that would eventually give birth to ISIS. On May 1, 2003, President George W. Bush declared major combat operations over. What followed was not peace, but a series of catastrophic policy decisions that dismantled the Iraqi state. Paul Bremer, head of the Coalition Provisional Authority, issued 2 orders that would reshape the Middle East. Order number 1 barred members of Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party from government positions. Order number 2 dissolved the Iraqi army. As documented by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, these decisions stripped roughly 500,000 people of their livelihoods overnight, many of them Sunni Arabs who had formed the backbone of Iraq's security and administrative apparatus. Trained military officers, intelligence operatives, bureaucrats who knew how to run a state suddenly found themselves unemployed, humiliated, and angry in a country sliding toward chaos. Into this vacuum stepped a Jordanian militant named Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. According to research from the program on extremism at George Washington University, Zarqawi had fought in Afghanistan and arrived in Iraq around 2002. He saw opportunity in the American invasion. By October 2004, his group pledged allegiance to Osama bin Laden and became al-Qaeda in Iraq, known as AQI. But Zarqawi was different from bin Laden's organization. Where al-Qaeda focused on attacking the far enemy, the United States and the West, Zarqawi wanted to ignite a sectarian war in Iraq itself. He targeted Shia Muslims with brutal bombings of mosques and markets, hoping to provoke retaliation that would drive Sunnis into his arms. His strategy worked with horrifying efficiency. The February 2006 bombing of the Al-Askari Mosque in Samarra, one of Shia Islam's holiest sites, sparked exactly the sectarian bloodbath Zarqawi wanted. Iraq descended into civil war. American and Iraqi forces killed Zarqawi in June 2006, but his organization survived. According to United Nations Security Council reports, by 2007, al-Qaeda in Iraq controlled significant territory in Anbar province and had declared an Islamic State of Iraq, though this was more aspiration than reality at the time. Then came a crucial turning point. Between 2006 and 2009, tens of thousands of suspected militants and insurgents were detained by American forces. Many ended up in a facility called Camp Bucca in southern Iraq. The START Research Center at the University of Maryland has documented how Camp Bucca became what intelligence analysts would later call a jihadi university. Hardened al-Qaeda operatives mixed freely with low-level offenders. Former Ba'athist officers met religious extremists, and a young detainee named Ibrahim Awad Ibrahim al-Badri, who would later take the name Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, forged the networks that would build ISIS. According to multiple intelligence assessments cited by the Wilson Center, Camp Bucca's inmates formed a who's who of future ISIS leadership. By 2008, al-Qaeda in Iraq was reeling. The American troop surge and the Sunni awakening, in which Iraqi Sunni tribes turned against the extremists, had nearly destroyed the group. According to the Council on Foreign Relations Conflict Tracker, AQI controlled almost no territory and was reduced to a few hundred hardcore fighters. The organization seemed finished. This is where many people think the ISIS story should have ended. It did not. Understanding why requires looking at what happened after American forces withdrew. In December 2011, the last American combat troops left Iraq. President Obama hailed the complete withdrawal, but according to analysis from the Rand Corporation, the departure came at exactly the wrong moment. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, a Shia politician, immediately moved against Sunni leaders. He issued an arrest warrant for the Sunni vice president. He purged Sunni officers from the security forces. The Sunni awakening fighters who had defeated al-Qaeda in Iraq found themselves marginalized, unpaid, and targeted by a government they viewed as sectarian and illegitimate. The very communities that had rejected extremism now felt they had no place in the new Iraq. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who had taken control of what remained of the Islamic State of Iraq in 2010, recognized the opportunity. According to research published by the George Washington University Program on Extremism, Baghdadi implemented a methodical strategy. He rebuilt the organization cell by cell. He reached out to former Ba'athist officers, the same men thrown out of work in 2003, offering them purpose and income. He targeted Sunni tribes that felt abandoned, and he waited for the next great opportunity. That opportunity arrived from an unexpected direction: Syria. In March 2011, protests against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad erupted as part of the Arab Spring. Assad's brutal crackdown triggered a civil war that would consume the country. By 2012, Syria was fragmenting into dozens of armed factions. Government forces were retreating from the east, and the long border between Syria and Iraq became effectively meaningless. According to the Wilson Center timeline, Baghdadi sent operatives into Syria in late 2011. They established a group called Jabhat al-Nusra that would fight Assad's forces while secretly remaining loyal to Baghdadi. In April 2013, Baghdadi made his move public. He announced that his Islamic State of Iraq was merging with Jabhat al-Nusra to form the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, ISIS, with al-Sham referring to Greater Syria or the Levant. But al-Qaeda's leadership, now headed by Ayman al-Zawahiri after bin Laden's death, had not approved this. Zawahiri ordered Baghdadi to stay in Iraq and leave Syria to Nusra. Baghdadi refused. According to United Nations reports on terrorist organizations, this marked the formal split between ISIS and al-Qaeda. Where al-Qaeda remained focused on spectacular attacks against the West and building gradual support, ISIS wanted territory, governance, and immediate establishment of a caliphate. They were not interested in waiting or in following Zawahiri's strategy of winning hearts and minds before declaring statehood. Throughout 2013 and early 2014, ISIS expanded rapidly across eastern Syria and western Iraq. They were receiving weapons, money, and recruits. According to CSIS analysis, the group benefited from multiple revenue streams including oil from captured wells, extortion, kidnapping, ransoms, and trafficking in antiquities. More importantly, they were absorbing other militias, sometimes through alliances and sometimes through force. Their fighters gained combat experience in the Syrian chaos, and they refined a military strategy that combined conventional tactics learned from former Iraqi army officers with guerrilla strikes and suicide bombings. Then came the breakthrough that shocked the world. On June 10, 2014, ISIS launched an assault on Mosul, Iraq's second-largest city with a population of nearly 2 million. According to the Wilson Center's detailed timeline, approximately 1,500 ISIS fighters attacked a city defended by 30,000 Iraqi security forces. The Iraqi army collapsed. Soldiers abandoned their posts, shed their uniforms, and fled. Within days, ISIS controlled Mosul and had seized American military equipment worth hundreds of millions of dollars, including armored vehicles, artillery, and weapons. Images of ISIS fighters parading through the streets with American hardware humiliated the Iraqi government and announced ISIS as a force that could defeat conventional armies. ISIS did not stop at Mosul. Throughout June 2014, they rolled south toward Baghdad, capturing Tikrit and threatening the capital itself. They swept west into Anbar province. They pushed east toward the Kurdish region and south toward Shia holy cities. The Iraqi state appeared to be disintegrating. On June 29, 2014, the first day of Ramadan, ISIS made history's most audacious terrorist declaration. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi announced the reestablishment of the caliphate, the first since the Ottoman Empire's collapse nearly a century before. He declared himself Caliph Ibrahim, commander of the faithful, and demanded the allegiance of Muslims worldwide. This was not merely propaganda. According to research from the START Center at the University of Maryland, ISIS now controlled territory stretching from Aleppo in Syria to Diyala province in Iraq, roughly the size of Great Britain. This territory held an estimated 8 million people. ISIS was not operating as a terrorist network. They were attempting to function as a state. And here is where their story becomes truly distinct from every other modern extremist group. They meant to govern. The Islamic State built institutions. According to analysis from the United Nations and multiple academic sources, including the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point, ISIS established a cabinet structure with ministries responsible for war, finance, media, education, health, and religious affairs. They set up courts that enforced their brutal interpretation of Islamic law. They created a taxation system that extracted revenue from the population through jizya taxes on non-Muslims, zakat religious taxes, and fees on everything from utilities to business licenses. They paid salaries to fighters and administrators. They repaired infrastructure, provided basic services, and in some areas even regulated food prices to prevent inflation. The scale of their financial operation was unprecedented for a terrorist group. United Nations Security Council reports documented that at its peak in 2014 and 2015, ISIS was generating up to $2 million per day from oil sales alone. They controlled wells, built refining capacity, and smuggled oil through networks that crossed borders into Turkey and Jordan. According to CFR analysis, they also made tens of millions from antiquities trafficking, looting archaeological sites in Syria and Iraq, and selling artifacts on the black market. Kidnapping ransoms brought in additional millions, with European governments particularly criticized for paying. But ISIS governance came with unimaginable brutality. This is the paradox at the heart of the Islamic State. While they built ministries and collected taxes like any government, they simultaneously implemented a reign of terror deliberately designed to shock and subjugate. According to human rights documentation from the United Nations, ISIS carried out public executions, beheadings, crucifixions, and mass shootings. They threw men accused of homosexuality from buildings. They stoned women accused of adultery. They imposed medieval punishments for theft, apostasy, and violations of their interpretation of religious law. The violence was not incidental to their governance, it was central to it. Most horrifying was their treatment of the Yazidi religious minority. In August 2014, ISIS assaulted the Yazidi homeland around Sinjar Mountain in northern Iraq. What followed was genocide. According to detailed United Nations investigations, ISIS massacred thousands of Yazidi men and boys. They kidnapped thousands of Yazidi women and girls, selling them in slave markets and distributing them to fighters as concubines. The UN Commission of Inquiry concluded this constituted genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Survivors who escaped described systematic rape, torture, and forced conversion. The Yazidi community, which had lived in the region for centuries, was shattered. ISIS documented their atrocities deliberately. Their media operation was as sophisticated as their military tactics. According to research from George Washington University's Program on Extremism, ISIS produced high-quality videos, maintained active social media accounts, and published a multilingual online magazine called Dabik. The content was professionally edited with cinematic production values. Some videos showed aid projects and governance. Others displayed horrific executions, including the beheadings of Western hostages like American journalists James Foley and Stephen Sotloff, and aid worker Peter Kassig. The message was dual. To local populations, it said submit or die. To potential foreign recruits, it offered a utopian vision of Islamic governance and the adventure of holy war. The recruitment campaign succeeded beyond what most analysts predicted. According to data compiled by the Sufin Center, between 2011 and 2016, approximately 40,000 foreign fighters from over 110 countries traveled to Iraq and Syria to join ISIS. They came from across the Middle East, from Europe, where countries like France, Belgium, and the United Kingdom saw hundreds depart, from North Africa, from Central Asia, and even from North America and Australia. Many were young men seeking purpose or adventure. Some were drawn by religious ideology, others by propaganda promising a state where Muslims could live under God's law. Women also traveled to join, forming households and supporting the state's infrastructure. This brings us to the global response. For months after Mosul fell, the international community seemed paralyzed. Then in August 2014, ISIS advances in northern Iraq, threatened a full genocide of Yazidis trapped on Sinjar Mountain, and pushed toward the Kurdish regional capital of Erbil. President Obama authorized the first American airstrikes against ISIS targets on August 8, 2014. According to the Department of Defense, these initial strikes aimed to protect American personnel in Erbil and provide humanitarian relief to the Yazidis. but they marked the beginning of a military campaign that would eventually involve more than 80 countries. In September 2014, the United States formally established the global coalition to defeat ISIS. According to coalition documents, the strategy rested on multiple pillars. Military force would degrade ISIS capabilities through airstrikes and support for local ground forces. Efforts would disrupt their financing by targeting oil infrastructure and financial networks. Intelligence sharing would track foreign fighters. Counter-messaging would challenge their propaganda. But the core military strategy was clear. American and coalition air power would support local forces on the ground rather than deploy large numbers of Western troops. This approach was born from painful experience. The Iraq War had shown the limits and costs of occupation. President Obama and other leaders were determined not to return to that. So the coalition empowered two main ground forces. In Iraq, the United States helped rebuild the Iraqi security forces, working with the government to incorporate Sunni tribal fighters and reform the military that had collapsed. In Syria, the United States partnered with the Syrian Democratic Forces, a coalition dominated by Kurdish fighters from the YPG, but also including Arab militias. Both approaches were controversial. The Iraqi forces were still linked to a government many Sunnis distrusted. The SDF's Kurdish leadership angered Turkey, which views the YPG as linked to the PKK, a Kurdish insurgent group Turkey considers a terrorist organization. The campaign began with grinding battles. In September and October 2014, ISIS launched an assault on Kobani, a Kurdish town in northern Syria right on the Turkish border. According to the Wilson Center timeline, ISIS poured fighters and equipment into the battle, seeing an opportunity to seize a strategic border crossing and humiliate the Kurds. For weeks, the battle raged block by block. Refugees fled into Turkey. It appeared Kobani would fall. Then coalition airstrikes intensified dramatically. American jets and drones hit ISIS positions repeatedly, destroying their armored vehicles and artillery. Kurdish YPG fighters held on. In January 2015, ISIS finally retreated. Kobani became a symbol. ISIS was not invincible. Over the next 2 years, the coalition methodically destroyed ISIS territory. According to Department of Defense statistics, coalition aircraft flew tens of thousands of sorties, striking ISIS command posts, weapons depots, oil facilities, and fighting positions. On the ground, Iraqi forces retook Tikrit in April 2015, then Ramadi in December 2015, then Fallujah in June 2016. Each battle was costly. Iraqi forces took heavy casualties. Civilians were trapped in crossfire. Infrastructure was devastated, but ISIS was losing. The decisive battle came in Mosul. In October 2016, Iraqi forces, backed by Kurdish Peshmerga, Shia militias, and intensive coalition air support, launched the offensive to retake the city where ISIS had declared its caliphate. According to detailed reporting from the Associated Press and analysis from CSIS, the battle lasted 9 months. ISIS turned Mosul into a fortress, digging tunnels, planting thousands of improvised explosive devices, and using civilians as human shields. Iraqi forces fought building by building through the old city's narrow streets. Coalition airstrikes leveled entire neighborhoods. The destruction was compared to World War II battles. When Iraqi forces raised their flag over the ruins on July 10, 2017, an estimated 10,000 civilians had died according to Associated Press investigations. Mosul was liberated, but it was also shattered. Meanwhile, in Syria, the SDF, heavily supported by American Special Forces and coalition air power, advanced on Raqqa, the city ISIS had made its de facto capital. The offensive began in June 2017. According to the United Nations, ISIS again used civilians as shields, planted massive numbers of mines and booby traps, and fought with suicidal determination. The SDF encircled the city, cut off escape routes, and pressed inward. Coalition artillery and jets hammered ISIS positions. Block by block, Raqqa fell. In October 2017, the SDF declared victory. Like Mosul, Raqqa lay in ruins, with thousands of buildings destroyed and much of the population displaced. By early 2018, the caliphate was reduced to scattered pockets in the Syrian desert near the Iraqi border. ISIS fighters, many with their families, made a last stand in the village of Baghouz. According to Wilson Center documentation, the SDF besieged Baghouz in late 2018. Thousands of ISIS members and their families surrendered, or were killed over several months of fighting. On March 23, 2019, the SDF announced the elimination of ISIS's last territorial holdings. The caliphate declared on June 29, 2014, was physically erased in less than 5 years. The final symbolic blow came on October 26, 2019. President Trump announced that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi had been killed in a raid by American special forces in northwest Syria. According to the Department of Defense account, Baghdadi fled into a tunnel when troops arrived and detonated a suicide vest, killing himself and children who were with him. The founder and leader of ISIS, the self-proclaimed caliph, was dead. So what actually defeated ISIS? The physical caliphate collapsed because the coalition strategy worked within its specific parameters. Superior air power destroyed ISIS's ability to fight as a conventional military force. Every time ISIS concentrated fighters or equipment, coalition jets could strike. According to Department of Defense figures, the coalition flew over 34,000 sorties and struck over 34,000 targets between August 2014 and March 2019. That overwhelming firepower made it impossible for ISIS to hold cities or defend fixed positions once ground forces attacked. The ground campaign succeeded because local forces, despite all their limitations, had greater legitimacy and sustainability than Western occupation troops would have had. Iraqi forces were fighting for their own country. Syrian Kurds were defending their homeland. Their casualties were immense, running into the thousands, but they persisted. American and coalition special forces embedded with these units provided training, intelligence, and coordination for airstrikes. This combination of local knowledge, Western technology, and relentless pressure eventually ground ISIS down. The financial war also mattered. According to United Nations reports, coalition strikes systematically targeted ISIS's oil infrastructure, destroying wells, refinement facilities, and tanker trucks. Banks and financial networks that moved ISIS money were sanctioned. This did not stop ISIS's income entirely, but it degraded their revenue significantly, making it harder to pay fighters and provide services to the population under their control. As ISIS territory shrank, so did their access to resources, creating a downward spiral. But here is the critical question. If ISIS was militarily defeated, if their territory is gone and their caliph is dead, why do we still talk about them as a threat? Because the physical caliphate was only one expression of the ideology and conditions that created ISIS. According to analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, ISIS has transformed back into an insurgency in Iraq and Syria, carrying out assassinations, ambushes, and attacks on security forces. They control no cities, but they operate in rural areas and desert regions where government presence is weak. They are patient, rebuilding networks and waiting for opportunities. More concerning is ISIS franchises beyond Iraq and Syria. According to the Wilson Center, ISIS affiliates now operate across 3 continents. ISIS Khorasan, based in Afghanistan and Pakistan, has carried out major attacks, including the August 2021 bombing at Kabul airport that killed 13 American service members and over 170 Afghans. ISIS West Africa, active in Nigeria and the Lake Chad region, has killed thousands and displaced millions. ISIS affiliates in the Sahel, in Mozambique, in Somalia, in the Sinai Peninsula all continue to conduct operations. These groups swear allegiance to ISIS leadership, adopt its branding and tactics, and contribute to an international network. Then there are lone actors inspired by ISIS, even with no direct operational connection. According to data from the START Center, ISIS-inspired or directed attacks have occurred in dozens of countries, including France, Belgium, the United Kingdom, the United States, Tunisia, and Sri Lanka. The November 2015 attacks in Paris killed 130 people. The March 2016 Brussels bombings killed 32. The June 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando killed 49. The ideology that ISIS promoted through its propaganda continues to radicalize individuals who then act independently. So what can we learn from this complete timeline? 5 key lessons stand out. First, state collapse creates opportunities for extremism. The dismantling of the Iraqi state in 2003, the marginalization of Sunni communities, the chaos of the Syrian Civil War, these were not inevitable. They were the results of policy choices and governance failures. According to research across multiple institutions including RAND and CSIS, extremist groups thrive in vacuums where legitimate governance has failed. ISIS did not conquer powerful states. They filled voids where states had already collapsed. Second, sectarian governance drives populations toward extremists. When the Maliki government in Iraq targeted Sunni communities, when those communities felt they had no political voice or protection, ISIS could position itself as their defender. According to analysis from the International Crisis Group, many Sunnis who supported ISIS in 2014 were not ideological jihadists. They were people who felt terrorized by their own government and saw ISIS as the lesser evil, or at least as a force that would empower their community. Inclusive governance that gives all groups a stake in stability is not just morally right, it is a security necessity. Third, military force alone does not resolve the underlying drivers of extremism. The coalition eliminated ISIS's caliphate in 5 years of intense operations. But according to United Nations assessments, the conditions that gave rise to ISIS remain in many places. Iraq still struggles with corruption, sectarianism, and weak state capacity. Syria remains fragmented among a brutal regime, Turkish-backed forces, American-backed Kurds, and various militias. Reconstruction has been slow. Millions of people are displaced. Communities that ISIS once controlled are still devastated and vulnerable. Without addressing these root causes, the ideology and the insurgency persist. Fourth, propaganda and ideology are as dangerous as weapons. ISIS demonstrated how extremist groups could use modern media to recruit globally and legitimize brutality. According to George Washington University research, even after the caliphate's collapse, ISIS content continues to circulate online, morphing across platforms and inspiring new radicalization. Countering violent extremism requires not just kinetic strikes, but sustained efforts to provide alternative narratives, support credible voices within communities, and address the grievances that propaganda exploits. Fifth, international cooperation matters, but so does local legitimacy. The 80-nation coalition demonstrated that countering transnational threats requires global partnerships. But the campaign also showed that without locally legitimate forces on the ground, no amount of air power can hold territory or win populations. According to multiple strategic reviews, the tension between empowering local partners, respecting sovereignty, and preventing extremist resurgence remains the central challenge in counterterrorism. As we look at the situation today, ISIS no longer holds cities or governs millions, but according to United Nations and intelligence assessments, the organization retains between 10,000 and 15,000 fighters in Iraq and Syria alone. Their affiliates worldwide add tens of thousands more. They have financial reserves. They maintain communication networks. They wait for the next opportunity. In Afghanistan, the Taliban's return to power has created new uncertainty, with ISIS-K launching attacks against Taliban forces. In Africa, instability and weak governance across the Sahel and West Africa provide fertile ground. In Syria, the unresolved political situation and the presence of tens of thousands of ISIS fighters and family members in detention camps present ongoing risks. Could another ISIS rise? According to experts at CSIS, the Wilson Center, and multiple other institutions, the potential exists everywhere that the same conditions combine. State weakness or collapse, sectarian or exclusionary governance, regional conflict that empowers militias, populations with deep grievances and no legitimate channels for redress, and the presence of experienced militants who provide organization and ideology. These factors created ISIS in Iraq and Syria between 2003 and 2014. They exist today in multiple regions. Whether they will produce another caliphate depends on the choices governments make, the investments the international community provides for stability and development, and the attention the world pays before the next crisis explodes. This timeline shows us that terrorism is not simply evil individuals appearing from nowhere. ISIS rose through a specific sequence of policy failures, governance breakdowns, and strategic blunders that created opportunities which a ruthless and organized group exploited. The military campaign that destroyed the caliphate was necessary, but it addressed the symptom, not the disease. The disease is political exclusion, state failure, and regional chaos. Until those are treated, the threat remains. The story of ISIS from 2003 to today is a story of cause and effect. The invasion of Iraq and the dismantling of its state, the marginalization of Sunni communities, the collapse of Syria into civil war, the spread of sectarian conflict across the region, Each link in this chain made the next more likely until a small group of extremists controlled territory the size of Great Britain and governed 8 million people through terror. Global military action eliminated that state, but the conditions that created it have not been fully resolved. So we end with the question you must ask. Where are the conditions forming for the next catastrophe? What power vacuums are growing? What excluded communities are radicalizing? What failing states are creating space for extremist governance? According to every expert who has studied ISIS, the warning signs are visible years before disaster strikes if anyone is paying attention. The challenge is whether policymakers, international institutions, and publics will act on those warnings or ignore them until another group declares another caliphate, seizes another city, and forces the world into another year's long battle to undo what patient attention might have prevented. If you want to understand how these dynamics continue to evolve, follow for the next analysis examining foreign fighter returnees and how ISIS ideology is adapting in the 2020s. The sources for this complete timeline include the Wilson Center's comprehensive timeline, The Rise, Spread, and Fall of the Islamic State. Research from George Washington University's Program on Extremism, particularly their work on ISIS governance and recruitment. Data from the START Center at the University of Maryland on ISIS history, ideology, and psychology. United Nations Security Council reports on ISIS financing and human rights violations. The Council on Foreign Relations Conflict Tracker,